I will insert a memory that I've presented many times in the circles at UWM that when I was growing up, and I believe during my atheist phase, my parents had the original Cosmos book.
Oh, sure.
Carl Sagan. Not his successor, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the update that most people today are probably more familiar with.
Sure.
And at the end of the book, there is the Lucy footprint. Interesting sidebar. Sagan, in that book, runs the probability of spontaneous generation, life beginning by chance and developing into the unfathomable complexity of the human brain and the human body.
Right.
And he himself generates essentially the same numbers as Christian or Muslim or Jewish apologists. And he a number so small, it's basically just the mathematical equivalent of impossibility. And then instead of drawing the obvious conclusion that his atheism is wrong, he proceeds to continue to tell stories about Contact, that book and movie, pretty openly anti-Christian, and about Native Americans with Europeans, and how when we find the aliens finally, even though you just basically proved by your own math that they can't be out there. And then he gets to the end and he has the Lucy footprint, the proto-hominid or whatever they think it is. I'm a creationist. I don't think that's what they were, but that's another subject. Just dodging my kicks there. But what's interesting is he refers to this as something to the effect of the universe coming to know itself. It's the end of the book. It's like the closing. It feels like the closing hymn at a church service.
It feels super pagan.
It really does.
It's super pagan now. Yeah, that sounds like to me.
Yeah, not that he wouldn't be deeply offended by that thought, because animism is on the low end of their totem pole of religious development. We at least qualify to be the phase right below rationalism.
If that's what helps people sleep at night, but at the end of the day, it's that's not what that means, really. You know what I mean? It's that's a strange way to go about life, I suppose. But like you were saying, I think at the end of the day, I hate this argument, but it seems as though a lot of people have reasons why they don't want God to exist. That's neither here nor there. But a lot of people do have reasons why it would be inconvenient for God to exist. Yeah.
I mean, and I believe that there has been a generational shift, because for all their flaws, when I was an atheist, and atheists that came out of the 90s and 2000s were optimistic. Like we were talking about, I think it was on the last program with the Trent Horn Catholic apologists responding to Dawkins, I think, lamenting political radicalism. It's there was a time when that Lucy footprint idea was where they were at. They were optimistic. They were forward looking. They actually thought not only were they on their crusade to free the world from superstition and backwardness, but that they had found the substitute for traditional religion in this weird, like you said, almost pantheistic, like the universe is God kind of feeling. And I remember one of my atheist friends, probably the most intellectual I've ever met. I got schooled by him a couple of times because I knew the apologetics, but I had no practice. And he had debated this before, semi-professionally, or overseen a debate. And I explained to him the final moment in in Contact, the movie, and the book, I assume, where Ellie, the character who is the skeptical scientist, they build the ship, they go up. Not to ruin the plot for anyone who's listening, but it makes a good point. They go up, they build the ship, she goes up, she meets the aliens, and the aliens take the form of her dearly departed father to make the first contact as natural and impactful as possible. And her father, in the guise of her father, they basically say, in the black void of space, we reach out to each other to fill in the emptiness. Now, if you're going to try to retain a shred of humanity as an atheist, which I ultimately couldn't pull off, not that I became immoral as much as I just became hopeless, but if you're going to try to retain what we would call the image of God, then you have to have something like that. Today I would say it's pitifully, it's tragically weak. I look at that, and I assume you would too, and almost weep, because that's compared to the hope of the gospel and Christianity. That's so small and empty and temporary. It really feels like an ultimate dose of copium, to use what you call one of my favorite words. Like, they're coping hard here. Like, but my atheist friend, he said that was beautiful. It's a beautiful sentiment. And it was a moment where I'm like, wow, this is a different worldview. And a man this intelligent and this moral. I mean, he was a neurologist. He dedicated his life to helping cure brain dysfunctions. So he's not an evil agent. Like, how does a man like that believe that is beautiful?
I think that we all have this unending moral burden that we seek to externalize, because, like, humans in a lot of ways are intrinsically good. We seek to do good to others, but it's perpetually warring against kind of our selfish natures, right? So it's this kind of competition, and that's kind of the basis of Jewish morality in a lot of ways: the good and the evil angel, so to speak, on the shoulder. But all of that to say, it's like it doesn't necessarily bind one who doesn't want to be bound by it, right? So you can build a world in which you seek good and naturalistic justice and humanism, but that only works until you have one Jeffrey Dahmer, or maybe not Dahmer, maybe maybe a Hitler, right? And Hitler's kind of the poster child, but he looks at the same naturalistic universe and he comes to a very, very, very different kind of conclusion. And his conclusion led to the deaths of millions. But there's no way to say that his conclusion was wrong, because at the end of the day, the only thing that is able to sustain these moral relatives is power. So again, we kind of reach that point where that's kind of an unsustainable way to live. Is the end of your pole is power, then that gets to a really nasty place. And we've seen how badly that can end in so many situations.
Early in Hitler's life, when he volunteered for World War I, Ian Kershaw, the kind of premier Hitler biographer of our age, said, I saw him say in an interview, that when Hitler went out with the List Regiment and experienced combat and they suffered like 80% casualties for the first time, that solidified the already percolating dynamic of, yeah, this universe is just brutality, because I survived because I'm stronger and my comrades died because they're weaker, and the enemy is there and we have to kill them, and that's how we win. And he was forged in the crucible of war to the degree that the Nazi movement glorified the trench experience. And when All Quiet on the Western Front was released, Wonderful movie, by the way, the recent German one, if frighteningly graphic as it should be. He actually, Erich Remarque actually got exiled from Nazi Germany because he had retained that conscience and that kind of like vaguely connected worldview. And yes, it's an extreme example of how at its most raw form, and that took the war, that took the rise of imperialism, the war, and the Depression to remove that much of God's restraining influence on a single nation. And the same thing obviously happened in Russia with, again, imperial rise, war, revolution, chaos, and then consolidation under communism. Same sort of idea. And there's a Russian historian. Apparently, there are Russian historians who argue, and you can see this play out in the way they fight the war in Ukraine today, that Stalin was justified in sacrificing 5 million lives in collectivizing industry because objectively it actually did get them ready for the much greater threat of the Nazi invasion. And at that point, it's like you were saying, how without an objective moral standard, without the universe having, like in the Kalam argument, a first cause? You can probably, to keep us on track here, you can extend this back into morality.
Precisely.
And you can say that every moral cause has to have another cause and another cause. It has to have a beginning. Without a beginning, then you just have math. You just have raw pragmatism. And 5 million is a lot less than 37 million. So, or maybe if the Germans had been able to kill 60 million Soviets. I mean, if you're just going on sheer pragmatism, that sounds like a bargain.
Right. Well, and I think the other interesting thing that we've talked about this a couple of weeks ago, it's the fact that the Christian calculation of human life is so different than the naturalistic one. I'm going to talk about Lewis a lot, probably in the next episode or in the next piece of this. But Lewis, he makes his argument in The Weight of Glory. He says that empires, nationalities, countries, philosophies, all of these are like a drop in the bucket compared to what the Christian purports the human person to be. And if the Christian faith is true, so if God exists, that means that it's possible for Christianity to be true. If God does not exist, then it's impossible for Christianity to be true, obviously, right? So the Christian calculation looks at the human life and says that the soul of this person is immortal, meaning that it can't die. Life is forever. That's the Christian conception, is life is forever, right? And that's kind of terrifying, mortifying thought, is life goes on forever in the Christian conception, right? So that is the thing where we're looking at each moral decision and we're saying this eternal soul is being impacted. And, like I was saying, our countries, our philosophies, our belief systems, those will die. The human person will not. And that's such a radical departure from anything that came before that it really does bear consideration.
The brutality of statistics, because in that conversation you were alluding to, I brought up the movie Enemy at the Gates. Phenomenal movie.
Yeah.
Brutal portrayal of how vicious both regimes were on the Eastern Front in World War II, the Nazi and the Soviet regimes. And the opening minutes are very comparable to Saving Private Ryan, maybe even worse.
Yeah.
Because in Saving Private Ryan, there is a very real sense that on Omaha Beach, when you see them making letters out to soon to be grieving mothers and such, there's a very real sense that in America at that time, and granted, they were extremely inconsistent when it came to Japanese lives, but hey, the nature is what it is. But that the death of every soldier was felt almost by the people, by the government, and especially by the families. And then you look at Enemy at the Gates, and it does a very effective job of portraying that to the Soviet regime, these soldiers were just tools. They were just numbers on a page to Joseph Stalin in the Kremlin. In fact, there's a scene in there which is easily verified. The Germans in their diaries confirm this is what the Soviets did. That you probably remember, Alex, that the guy standing saying, "One, you go in pairs. One man has a weapon. When he falls, the other man takes the weapon."
Yep.
And then they charge the Germans, get slaughtered by the Germans, turn around, and they get three strikes and you're out from their own officer. Traitors will be punished. And then he looks at the Soviet machine gunner, and says, off they go. And 99.9% of them die either in a futile frontal assault where the bloody hierarchy knew they were going to die, or they're just mown down by their own officers. Just these are just what's even Cognitive machine is almost too high of you when you're describing the Soviet view of their people. They're like expendable chaff. They're like the gas you put in your car. You burn it and then it's gone. And there's a lot more on the way.
I mean, talk about the impacts of the atheist-theist debate and how much we portray the church as being, the enemy of natural reason. The Soviet Union is a pretty good example of what happens when you have a corrupt atheistic philosophy that does away with any thoughts of the eternal and only focuses on the secular order. And B, modern machinery. Boy, you can do a whole lot of evil with those two philosophies. And Stalin actively persecuted the church. And he said the church is bad. It's, very bad, no good thing. He got rid of it. And I mean, like the new atheists, they should have thought that, well, isn't that a great thing? If Orthodox Christianity is the basis of the Russian political ethos and personal ethos, and doing away with it, wouldn't that be a good thing? But instead, when you pump in an evil, corrupted ideology, what do you expect to get but mass death and carnage?